Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin to the video. Phil Rogers has left AMD and is jumping ship. He is now working over at Nvidia. In fact, he will be Nvidia's chief software architect and for compute servers. So this is actually quite a big blow. Phil Rogers is infamous in the industry. He's one of the main guys over at AMD that was, I guess you could say, the brainchild of heterogeneous computing. So once again, he is now the chief software architect compute server over at Nvidia. He has been working at AMD, originally ATI, obviously ATI merged / was bought out by AMD, for 21 years. That's someone who's really been, I guess you could say, entrenched in the organisation. He's been really just, I guess you could say, critical. But anyway, now he has moved on, and this is quite profound. So I'm sure you're aware that AMD themselves have also recently lost Jim Keller. Now, Jim was one of the head architects over at Zen. It's not to say that Jim himself has been so ingrained with AMD. It's true that AMD and Jim have had a history, but Jim has since moved to different companies, and now the main work of AMD with Zen is finished. He's able to move on, so that isn't such a big deal. However, the fact that they have lost this recent individual is quite profound. To give you an idea of the level of respect AMD actually bestowed upon Phil Rogers, he was known as a corporate fellow. Now, the title of corporate fellow is actually the highest level of technical recognition at AMD. It's reserved for those who impact the business opportunities and technical breadth by providing a high degree of expertise, knowledge, creativity, and tactical strategic direction. So, as I said, he was fairly integral to their thinking of compute, of heterogeneous computing, and he was involved with the GPU, CPU, as well as the software. So obviously you know what GPU compute is. It's basically the act of the CPU farming out work to the GPU, having the GPU perform that task. So let's just, for the sake of argument, if it was gaming related, it might be physics on server farms, it might be something different. For example, it could be various, let's say, simulations or what have you. But obviously when it comes to heterogeneous, it's the CPU, GPU, even further working in collaboration, effectively even addressing the same memory spaces, that type of thing. In fact, he was also a key role in AMD's fusion technology. As I'm sure many of you are aware, Nvidia are very invested in server technology, and their next generation of GPUs, for example, Volta, is definitely heading in the direction of compute. We know, for example, that they are going to be implementing a technology known as NVLink, and the NVLink is, I guess you could say, PCIe on steroids. It allows considerably faster data movement between the GPU, the CPU, and multiple GPUs, in fact, and it will possibly eventually make its way to gaming PCs, but the primary focus of it is definitely server related. In other words, for high-end, super powerful workstations which are going to be calculating the movement of the universe type of level. Now, as I said, the next generation GPUs, for example Pascal, Volta, are going to be greatly influenced by compute. This is a movement away from the Maxwell architecture. That's not to say that Maxwell's bad, but as we've discussed many times over, Maxwell, I guess you could say, was more designed for games, and it's one of the reasons that the whole asynchronous shader thing, as you all know, Maxwell hasn't dealt so well with that with DirectX 12. There are, of course, problems with AMD's GPUs, definitely when it comes to DX12, because not, as we've discussed many times over, DirectX 12 is not fully compliant on any GPU currently out as of the time that I'm recording this. Next year, you know, with the next generation GPUs, also known as Arctic Islands from AMD and Pascal from Nvidia, that will probably change. But for now, no GPU is fully DirectX 12 compliant. So therefore, you've got this kind of weird amalgamation effect of GPUs, where some games are definitely going to handle considerably better in AMD's architecture and some games in better in Nvidia's. However, when it comes to compute orientated functionality, Nvidia's are definitely falling behind on certain tasks, and in this case asynchronous shaders. So it is a shame that he has left. I obviously don't know the reasons behind his departure, but I'm sure you can probably guess that most of them are probably financially motivated. Then again, it could not be. It could just simply be that he's thought, you know what, I've worked at this place for so long, I just want to move to somewhere else. I want to maybe get involved in other projects. Maybe I feel that I've done what I can here. I've set everything that I can set in motion. Most of my workload, I don't feel I can innovate any further. You know, maybe the projects are still a couple of years away from being completely and utterly realised. Let's say, for example, you've got a roadmap which is going to take 2 years to be built. You've got the R&D, the actual taping out, the testing, the drivers, all of the software, the programming. All of that stuff takes considerable amounts of time, and he might have said, you know, I'm done. I feel that I've done what I can with the innovation. I feel like I've done what I can with the design. I feel like I've done what I particularly want to do. Maybe it's time for me to move on to a different company. The major downside, however, from the point of view with AMD, aside from losing the talent, is fairly obvious. The knowledge, the inside knowledge of the intellectual property. And it's not just little things like, I know their roadmaps, but it's actually an in-depth knowledge of knowing what the methodologies that they were going to achieve, or how they were achieving it rather, when they were going to achieve it, the methodologies of even the research, the development, knowing all of those details. It's going to be rather critical, and I would be rather upset if I were AMD. Of course, there are definitely going to, well, almost certainly going to be some safeguards in there where he's not going to be able to kind of divulge that information, but even so, it's not particularly good. And I hope from AMD's standpoint, it doesn't particularly impact them for now. I just want to reiterate that from the desktop side of things, you know, for, let's say, Arctic Islands, it's probably not going to make that much of a difference for the time being. It's also not going to make that much of a difference to Zen, for example, because let's face it, Zen, you know, the actual processor is pretty much taped out at this point. They're doing bug testing and all of that stuff. These things do take some considerable amounts of time. To give you an indication of how long this stuff takes, because you might not realize it, but once the basic chip has been, you know, developed, you may not realize it, but this actually does take some time, and I'm going to get a little old school with you all. You might remember that 3DFX went bankrupt, we all know that, back with the Voodoo 5. 4 and 5 technically were released at the same time, and at the time 3DFX were working on other GPUs. They were working on what was effectively a die shrink of the architecture inside the Voodoo 4 and 5, but they were also working on what was known as Rampage. So Rampage was, I guess you could say, fully TNL. It had all of the features, and it was largely a very next generation based GPU. Now, there were actually some which were produced in production. There were 24 chips made, and about 20 boards were created, just for your point of reference. So whatever happened to the other 4 chips, I don't know. But I do know this story because I was kind of Googling it the other day, because I was a massive 3DFX gamer back in the day. Anyway, so the story goes that these chips were being worked on quite literally days before 3DFX announced its closure. The chip, the actual GPU, the most of the I guess you could say the design, it was done. They were actually working on the silicon, and there are actually boards out there of this GPU, which people do have. They're extremely rare. Obviously, there's only 20 of them available, at least as far as we understand. And in fact, they were one of the cases that one chap actually had it. I believe the website is the Dodge Garage, but I'm not 100% on that. But anyway, he owned this GPU, and funny point. the actual manufacturer or the engineers who were working on it, there was actually a bit of a problem with the tape out of the GPU, and one of the issues that they hadn't noticed within the design is that the output, the VGA output, was inverted. So in short, white became black and black became white, and you can kind of imagine how that went. So they actually created their own little dongle to get around that, and various things were disabled. So for example, AGP texturing and all that stuff apparently was disabled on board as well. So it was almost acting like a dumb PCI device, not PCIe, PCI. So I'm not sure exactly what was enabled and is disabled, but pretty much what I'm saying is that's an indication of what happened. So the GPU was developed, and it was, by all intents, very early alpha drivers were around. Some games would load, some would have like really sparkly, kind of shiny, shimmery textures, like your memory, like the VRAM was damaged or something. But essentially speaking, the GPU was largely finished. There was just tweaking of the architecture. However, even so, it wasn't enough to save 3D effects, because they couldn't just keep going. Because the debts were mounting, they had this major problem of, yeah, we've got this killer product, yes, it's going to revolutionize, yes, it's going to be faster than anything Nvidia have at the moment, that's for certain, but they didn't have enough capital behind them to survive the months and months and months it would take to develop it, for the full R&D to go forward, and to get the drivers, the revisions down, to get the silicon with good enough yields where they could actually enter production and all of that stuff. So what I'm saying is, let's just say for the sake of argument, it could have been another 6 or 12 months or whatever for production. So that just gives you an idea of just how long, even with we're testing the damn silicon, how long this stuff actually goes on for. But the engineers, largely the actual thing had been pretty much been developed. You know, they were actually making very small numbers of the silicon. Admittedly, it was still beta silicon, it wasn't finished, but it kind of gives you an idea of why this stuff takes so long, and why, despite the fact that Jim Keller has left, the fact that Zen largely isn't affected. Anyway, that's just a bit of a story. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. That was a bit of a ramble, but let me know if you enjoyed those little, I wouldn't go as far as to say analogies, but it was a thing. But anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.